So, Mr. Hick, we heard mostly a conversation about the veracity of evolution and natural selection without much mention of a case for intelligent design. Could you provide one to describe what a non-religious version would look like?
Well, the case for intelligent design would be any scientific branch that you're aware of. In every instance, science seems to move toward a greater and greater detailed understanding of how the science actually works. And as we've said, I know of no other branch of science, with the exception of quantum physics, where random chance is the answer to things. It just isn't, that isn't the way that science typically progresses. We don't say, well, it happens somehow, we don't really know when it's going to happen, or what percentage, but it just kind of does. We don't go that way. We try to nail things down. So it would seem to me that the peer-reviewed articles and so on and so forth that would say, look, the math just doesn't work. Whatever your generational variation, calculation is, there just isn't enough time in order to allow that number of generational changes. So in classic scientific theory, someone proposes a hypothesis, the Cambrian explosion. A mathematician says, okay, well, if, then, runs the numbers out and says it doesn't work. Now, it's not incumbent necessarily upon that scientist to say, okay, I've got the answer. There's a lot of science that is just done to say, look, the current prevailing theory is probably not correct. We need to look elsewhere. And I think even Z would tell you that there have been numerous suggested, over time, solutions to the various problems that Darwin's theory has thrown up. It has not been a stable piece of theoried science. Every time one of these major problems comes up, somebody comes up with another answer, and then another one, and another one, and another one. So even on that side of the debate, they recognize that some of these are significant problems. In fact, I'll key off of one he said earlier. He talked about the calcium in the fossils. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Z, but I thought that the recent fossil finds show that the fossils showed a tremendous number of worms, non-calcified organisms.
Worms have an exoskeleton.
Well, I'm saying that it once again appeared to be, rather than the fossil record proving the evolutionary theory, there is many fossil finds that seem to say, oops, that wasn't what we expected to find. And I don't know how we resolve the battling of scientific papers.
Sure. Let me respond for a moment to the math that you keep on bringing up. Because if it's the same kind of math that I understand and that I have been talking about and debating against for a while, it's the kind of math that would conclude that Shakespeare couldn't have written Hamlet because there are too many possible combinations of letters in the human alphabet. That's the kind of math that tends to get brought up every time intelligent design is brought up. And the difficulty is that, yes, you can do mathematical analyses on the numbers of possible ways you could piece amino acids together to make a protein, and you'll come up with an astronomical number. And that's all right. It's saying that you can't assemble a 747 by spinning a tornado through a junkyard. And no evolutionary biologist is making that claim. No scientist would make that claim. The only people who are making that claim are people who are attempting to make a case for the design proponentists. The only...
Speaking of math, the way that the equation works is this. The power of a scientific theory is its explanatory power. As expressed by the equation, the number of things that it explains as the numerator, and the number of things that you have to assume in order for the theory to work as the denominator. By that measure, evolution by natural selection is the most powerful scientific theory in the history of science.
Certainly. On the side of evolution, we have a coherent picture which explains everything that we've discovered in geology, in biology, in genetics over the past 100 years. And on the other, we have ID, which is the, let me see, I took notes on this, which is the certainty that we will find something that governs speciation, maybe in the DNA. Zero explanatory power, zero mechanism. It's certainly not a fair fight. And it's true that theories can compete. But for theories to compete, they have to make legitimate predictions. They have to make testable predictions. They have to be plausible. They have to have an idea of what is wrong with the prevailing theory. And the difficulty is that the the ideas about what's wrong with the prevailing theory are all transparently not problems.
We're going to take a question.
Well, it was one of my questions. You brought up the predictive nature of the theories, and it has to be able to predict something and be able to come true to be a theory. It's a theory of intelligent design. Have they made any predictions that have been documented to come true?
I don't know of any particular theory that they have proposed that has been tested, but then again, you could say the same thing for evolutionary theory.
Now, with evolutionary theory, you can talk about antivirus, and there's many, many predictions that evolution has put forward, and that has.
Well, I don't know what you're referring to. The one that I was going to refer to was, you would think that after all this time, someone would have taken a very, very fast reproducing and living organism, put it under stress in a laboratory environment even, and produce speciation. And my understanding of that is that that has not happened. What they have.
That has happened hundreds of times in the literature. It has happened with fruit flies, it has happened with worms, it has happened with nematodes, it has happened with bacteria. E. coli, in the laboratory, subjected to stress, has evolved an entirely new way of using a completely different carnivore. It has evolved a way of eating a new kind of food that has never been documented to eat before.
And on the macro side, it has happened with the Hakey crab. As Carl Sagan lucidly explains in, I think it's the 4th episode of the series Cosmos, about how artificial selection was superimposed by the fishermen deselecting these crabs, or selecting these crabs that look like Japanese warriors, releasing them, but the ones that don't look like the Japanese warriors become dinner. And over the course of only a couple of hundred years, an entirely new species of crab, this Hakey crab, named after this tribe of Japanese warriors, evolved because of artificial selection. So if artificial selection can create such a radical change on the macro scale over a couple of hundred years, imagine the speciation and the variation that you would have over the term of 4 billion years of evolution of life on Earth.
Real quick,
Perhaps Ben could address this. When he came to me, I said, the only problem with this kind of a debate is going to be, you're going to have potentially the battle of scientific papers. And the majority of the audience is not going to be qualified one way or the other to assess the validity of the scientific paper. If you come up, I'll be happy to show you some scientific references and papers that say the exact opposite. I'm not qualified to say which paper is accurate or right or wrong or whatever. My point to you is, if you believe that only one side has science on their side, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because these are peer-reviewed scientific papers that are published in scientific journals and so on and so forth. So I am not qualified to disagree with a statement that you make, nor necessarily with a statement that Z would make. My only request is, if you accept Z's statement at face value because you perceive him to have the scientific backing behind him, I've got no problem with that. Please accept that there is scientific backing behind intelligent design. Whether you like that idea or not, it has scientific backing. These are peer-reviewed scientists doing peer-reviewed work.
I'm going to take a question